the Wednesday Mind emission coming from New York City. On the Toad Cam, the mind, NLP and the mind, psychedelics and the mind, knowing that you have a mind. NLP is, if NLP has done one thing, it's very useful, quite valuable for the world that it's situated in, is that it has created a platform or a mechanism for bringing to one's attention the idea that one has a mind, to think about the mind as a mind, as something with a degree of programmability and a certain degree of plasticity and a certain degree of option, choice, where maybe one was not aware that one has options or choices. That's very much the distinction between, you might say, the poverty mind, the consciousness of poverty, and the consciousness of wealth or the consciousness of success. The successful mind, you might say the wealthy mind, is a mind that is aware of the number of options and choices that are available to it. The impoverished mind is the mind that lacks a sense of possibility, that lacks a sense of how many choices or options might be available, how differently that mind might be interacting with external reality, and how differently that mind might be creating internal reality. So the idea of mind is always there, I think, for me, for a lot of people, has always been there in the background of NLP. Why do it? What's it about? Why should we be motivated to do this? Because it puts us into the posture of having an active relationship with the mind. Underscore that term, active. An awful lot of what we would call sort of day-to-day, half-conscious psychology doesn't really seem to acknowledge or even notice that there is a kind of an underpinning of consciousness giving rise to this idea of the self in the world. Now that's a very, very sophisticated idea relative to the kind of background noise that we're in as a culture, as a kind of network mechanism of thought moving around and information moving around, that there's a central role that the mind plays, and one can program that, one can change it, one can take a very proactive stance toward mind and consciousness. I would further propose that the more diminished one's sense of choice, or the more diminished one's sense of having available means for redirecting consciousness or shaping consciousness or filling out consciousness, we would say that that type of mind would tend also to be prone to narrowness, prone to neuroticism, in extreme cases to crippling lacks of a sense of possibility, into a crippling sense of being slotted into some very narrow early format that was laid out for that mind. So, yes, brain science, neuroscience is now very actively pursuing this question of how does the brain, how does the physical stuff, the living matter that we can observe and put under microscopes and all that kind of stuff, give rise to this more ephemeral thing, or this ephemeral process of consciousness? Is it a thing? Is it a process? There may be entirely new words that do not yet exist in language. We may have yet to arrive at that point where certain words emerge as significant ways of abstracting ideas. I've certainly learned that a lot by using the ngrams.googlelabs.com/search engine. I've been watching how concepts and ideas will arise, and then another concept that seems to be either an abstraction or something that Whitehead might call a concretion of that original idea seems to follow on that. Maybe a generation later, something is built on that, some new idea, some new way of perceiving the world, some new way of giving shape and form and structure to experience that is encoded in language and encoded in behavior and writing will emerge. And sometimes a term or a concept will start to weaken and vanish and be replaced by something else when it no longer is adequate or no longer is useful for really talking about the world. So this process is going on unconsciously, deeply, internally and externally in the larger culture. What NLP does is NLP takes that idea and say, well, let's make that the central thing we're going to be doing when we're doing NLP. And I think there's a lot of just very sort of indulgent or not very sufficient, not very useful ways of looking at NLP that tend to have a lot more to do with marketing and tend to have a lot more to do with, I don't know what, just sort of head tripping or something. But I think when you really get down to the basis of what it's about, it's very much about giving to the mind the suggestion that many ways of being conscious, many ways of changing consciousness and experimenting with consciousness are available that did not appear to be available. And I will tell you, I know so many people, and some very smart people, some very successful people, others not so, who seem to have almost no concept of mind, no concept that the brain is giving rise to this dynamically changing, modifiable process of mind. But the mind is very, very central. And it came to my attention that during the period of the slaveholding periods, when the American economy, the agricultural Southern economy, was based on slaves and owning slaves, that was absolutely critical. It was a serious crime. It was a very serious crime. I don't know what the punishment was for it, death or something, for teaching a slave to read. The idea was that that slaves absolutely were never to be taught to read. And I don't know. I don't know what they would do if they found a literate slave. If they would either do something horrible to that person, or sequester that person, or make sure that that person had no contact with anybody else. And you think about it a little bit. Why would that be basically a very strongly enforced piece of public policy in a slave society? Well, obviously, because if people start reading, they start having a very different relationship with their minds. They start thinking differently. New ideas start expanding and shaping the mind. And if you want to keep a people enslaved, and that can happen on multiple levels, and don't kid yourself that they're not subtle forms of enslaving and enslavement processes that are taking place now in the middle of this culture, that we're in. And I do mean subtle, but I think they're present. You keep that person away from high-level abstract thinking. You keep them down in very simple, moment-to-moment, in the present, concrete thinking. And you keep them away from the idea of forming abstractions. And that's once you have a population that has no concept of an abstraction, abstractions, especially high-level, very functional abstractions, must seem like some kind of strange juju, some kind of strange external magic that you don't know how that works and don't know what that means. I remember, I was in this cab, and I was with this old cab driver once, and he was an old guy, but he's real smart, he's real curious. And he said, "What do you do?" And I said, "Well, I do a lot of work in mathematics." And he turned to me and said, "What is mathematics?" He never had somebody there that could tell him, what mathematics was. He'd heard about it, but he just didn't know what the hell mathematics was. I said, "Well, mathematics is a very pure way of thinking. If you want to get down to what it's really about, it's not just a bunch of symbols and gobbledygook. What mathematics is, when you really get down to it, is a very pure thought. It lets you think in very pure ways." And then I think for the rest of the ride, this guy was going, "Wow, mathematics is pure thought. Mathematics is pure thought." He's repeating this over and over to himself. It just kind of blew his head that all of a sudden he got that on some level. And it kind of blew my mind that his mind was being blown. And I thought, well, that's really interesting. There is a guy who has just all of a sudden stepped into another another state of awareness about how the mind might function, or what it might mean to use the mind, or how the mind might be instructed, or how the mind might be developed. It was really a striking moment for me to see this guy come into this level of understanding and awareness. But I think that's what, if we're doing NLP well, I think that's what we're doing kind of, on a continual basis. So that'll be my little NLP promo bit, and hope you didn't mind that. We'll talk later.